you can. As you can.
Is the exclusion order. And I don't know whether you've read it or not, and I don't know whether I'm going to read it without my glasses. It gave certain areas of the western states that we had to evacuate. And also the curfew that was imposed on us, like, what was it, from 8 o'clock at night?
Yes.
To like 6 in the morning or something like that. There was a curfew. I just want to give you a little bit of that background. And this is how we were notified. This is the exclusion order, and these were posted on buildings and telephone poles telling us we had to leave by a certain date. We had to meet at a certain area, and the Army buses and trucks took us from there. Now, people wonder, how did this happen? How did it happen? There's a whole list of Bill of Rights. I have these things that I'm going to put here that you can look at if you want to afterwards. But freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to assemble, all these things were denied us. And the right to keep and bear arms. They took guns, they took cameras. Freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, all these things, a whole list of things that were violated. The Bill of Rights was ignored, was tossed aside, because, why? We were supposedly a threat to this country, threat of espionage. Does this kid look like she's a threat? That's how old I was. Just graduated high school from Mark Hippel High. A threat. Never had a trial, never accused of any crime. We were gone. Jim made these photostatic copies for Dave, Bill, myself, and for himself. And I carried this copy.
You didn't say what it was. You didn't say what it was.
Oh, this is my birth certificate. It's a copy of my birth certificate that I carried with me in my wallet. It's all creased up. I carried it for 45 years until I went to Washington to lobby for redress and reparations. I thought, well, maybe I won't need it. And I took it out of my wallet. Now, how many people in this country have to carry their birth certificate to prove their citizenship? I was born on Kanga Boulevard. Won't tell you the year, but a while back. We went first to Pomona Fairgrounds. Every time I attend the fair, I look around the parking lot and think, this was home for us for 3 months. We were picked up at Covina Park May 15th, 1942, and 3 months later got orders to go to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. I participated in the sale, VFW sale of poppies behind bars, and sold those. And we had a lot of comments, but we did sell a few. I have a copy of a postcard that I wrote to a friend of mine. This was May 17th. We left on the 15th. This is on the 17th. I wrote a postcard to her. Dear Audrey, well, here I am. Never thought it could be possible. I want to go home already. Seems like I've been here for years. Have gotten thin already. I was only 93 pounds to begin with. Food isn't very nourishing. Nothing is organized. Nothing to do so right often. Dusty and windy every day. Dorothy. This was our orders to go to Wyoming. Heart Mountain, Wyoming was situated 4,600 elevation, which was a little high for us lowlanders here, people who lived at sea level all their lives. That first winter, We went there in August, that first winter. In September, I think it started snowing. It was minus 29 degrees that first year. We were not properly clothed, so the government issued us old Navy peacoats.
World War One vintage.
Right.
World War One vintage.
And that first meal that we had when we went to camp in 42 was served in old mess kits from World War One.
Right.
Mess kits. And the first meal was cold rice, fried fish, and overcooked broccoli. It was not very appetizing. Heart Mountain, Wyoming was built, it housed over 10,000 people. It was built in 60 days.
Mostly in high school.
Well, they hired anybody who could
Swing a
hang
hammer.
on to a hammer. Didn't matter if he could swing it. There was 46,000 acres. We went recently to a symposium there in Powell, Wyoming, right out of Heart Mountain, and visited the site. And it was kind of hard to imagine that this camp was there. It's now a peaceful meadow looking down over there. That it was, the weather is a hostile climate there. The elevation was rather high. The winter is extremely cold. The summer was very short growing period, and Jim
Yeah, he's back.
Jim
Had 90 days.
was in the agriculture department, and he set out the planting and tested the soil of the whole area to determine what to be planted where and when. And we had a most successful agriculture department project there, so successful that we were shipping produce to other camps. We were pretty much self-sustaining after a while. They started chicken farms and a pig farm. So, and the produce that was produced in a short 90-day growing period. There was a book published by Estelle Ishigo, who has passed on, but she was a Caucasian lady married to an Issei.
Let me show you
She
the back.
drew, sketched pictures and wrote, and I always show this because it really shows what life was like in camp, because she herself experienced it. There's a movie about her called Days of Waiting, which is a very touching film, if you could ever have the opportunity to see it, or if you can ever get this book. When you have extreme cold and wide open spaces, what do? You flood the field and you go skating. So Dorothy got her first pair of skates and ordered it through the mail order and went skating. And I did work. I was a secretary eventually in the agriculture department. The wage scale was $12, $16, or $19 a month. A doctor could earn $19 a month. Some pictures of my boss, Dr. Hartman, and part of the agriculture project. I was in a girls' club. There was a lot of organizations to keep the kids busy. The Debonaires. And here's a picture, a publication of the Sentinel, Heart Mountain Sentinel, that was printed there. And there's happens to be a picture of Jim down there in the field. And while we were incarcerated in those camps, our guys volunteered and went to serve in the service when they were finally accepted. I had other pictures of Jim and Bill, but I think I took them out for the video and I couldn't find them. My former husband, John, was also in the service. He was in the 3rd Rangers. He was in the landing at not Normandy, at the Normandy, but the Utah Beach. I have a picture here of Bill and I leaving Heart Mountain for Chicago. I have my jacket in that. Can you open it? Mm-hmm. I still have that jacket that I wore.
That's that plaid jacket.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember?
Here's a publication from the museum.
Put it on.
I could still fudge. I left the seams out.
Told you we'll try
Here's
it
a
on.
panoramic. Here's a panoramic picture that the museum, Japanese American National Museum, distributed of Heart Mountain, and I think I see a picture of Mas Nagai, and I think I'm over here somewhere, and I think that picture up here, I think, is Kay Moma's mother and dad up here. This little corner up here. Anyway, when I was cleared to leave Heart Mountain, I went to Chicago, as many of us did. Here is VE Day. Finally, I'm going to have to laminate this. Japan surrenders.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah,
open
it's
it.
falling apart. And then the fight for redress. By chance, I happened to find a picture in Washington, D.C. of National Coalition for Redress and Reparation that I went with. Just happened to read somewhere that they were going to Washington, and I thought, why not? We need to speak out, we need to support it. So I went twice to Washington, lobbied with House of Representatives and Senate, and went through, under, and around the Capitol building, and it had a wonderful educational experience. And I should have shown you this at the beginning. This is a suitcase that I took with me and have kept all these years. It's fallen apart.
50 years ago.
But you have heard time and again about what little we could take with us when we went to camp. Some places were allowed 2 suitcases or whatever you could carry. You left back everything else. And when you ask a person, if this happened to you, what would you take? What would you leave? What was precious to you, or too precious to take? That was the decision we had to make. What do you do with your businesses? What do you do, like our farm equipment, the horses, household equipment? They were all left behind. But I close with this. As little space as we had to take articles with us, I took this. This was a flag that we displayed at our stores on the standard in front of the store. This is the 48-star flag, which is, it's a novelty to some of you young people. You haven't even seen the 48-star flag. But this is what I carried. I carried it with me, and I always When I speak to the high school kids, I tell them, respect your flag, honor the Constitution, and fight for it and protect it. Questions?
Let me see.
Don't forget your jacket.
Yeah.
Like Dorothy said, when the order 9066 was posted on the telephone poles, there was one right down on the corner of St. George and Rowena. And when I saw that, and my parents saw that, they knew that they were going to be sent someplace, probably someplace where the weather was very, very harsh. And so my father sent my mother and I down to Los Angeles, and he told us to be sure and buy a pair of boots. And so my mother and I bought a pair of boots, and I wore this all the way during my time in Hart Mountain. And it wore out, and you can see where the cobblers in camp didn't have pieces of leather yet to fix them. So but they did have taps, so they put taps on them so they wouldn't wear out so fast. And then during the war, they didn't have much leather because the leather went to war too. And so we have a composition of some sort that was made to repair these boots. And I've had them, it seems like it's a security blanket for me, and I just can't part with it. When we were in Santa Anita, we showered where the horses were showered. And there was no partition except for one partition, partitioning the men's side and the women's side. And there we were. We took our showers right on the cement floor where the horses were showered and washed. And therefore the horses didn't care if their hooves got muddy. But we did, and when we took a shower, our feet were dirtier than when we went to the shower because there was so much mud flowing on the floor. And so the internees picked up scrap lumber and made wooden clogs. They're called geta in Japanese. And one of my friends made a miniature one and printed Santa Anita, and it's a brooch. It's a souvenir from Santa Anita. In our barracks, they built barracks on the Santa Anita parking lot, and also I was very fortunate because I was one of the later ones to go in, and so I got to live in a barrack instead of a stable. Some of my friends lived in stables, and they were not cleaned out very well before they threw and painted whitewash all over the inside of these stable rooms. And especially in the summertime, in the summer months we were there, it would heat up and the stench was just tremendous. It was really terrible. Like I said, we were fortunate we got to live in a barrack that was newly built. but it was built with green lumber, and so the lumber finally shrank, and every night you could hear it crack, and sometimes the sap would fall off the ceiling, and one time it fell in our hair, and oh, what a job it was to try and get that sap out of your hair. And when the green lumber shrank, the knots in the lumber would pop out. And so the people in the camps picked up the little knots, and this is my name carved in a knot. And this is a heart pendant of a wooden knot that fell out of my barrack room. And this is a pendant made from probably a crate or scrap lumber, and painted with a beautiful little bird on a flower, perched on a flower. And then they carved birds also. And these are some of the things that the internees did in their spare time. And here is a peach pit made into a ring. And then here is a little monkey, and it's really intricate. And I'll pass this around so you can see it. It's apricot pit, and it's a little monkey, and he's chewing on his end of his tail. He's quite cute. Another thing I wanted to say was when we got to Heart Mountain, they finally built a elementary school and a high school, but at the beginning, the children were taught by the internees, but they were not legally supposed to teach, because did you know that there wasn't a Nisei teacher during that time, because in California they did not allow Japanese to become teachers. So there was no Nisei teacher to teach legally in the schools. So when they finally got the building built, the elementary schools and the high schools, they had to employ Caucasian teachers from the state wherever the camp happened to be. Ours was in Wyoming. And so most of the teachers had assistant teachers, though. For instance, I think most of the high schools had one Caucasian math teachers, and then they had assistant internee teachers. And I've heard people say to me that some of the student teachers or assistant teachers could do circles around the Caucasian teachers. But anyway, that's how it was. Let's see, what else should I add to Dorothy's presentation? Would anybody, oh yes, the restrooms in the latrines, which were in our camps, did not have any partitions on the men's side. On the women's side, there were partitions, but no doors. So eventually, we hung sheets in front of the stalls, but just a few. Most of them stayed without a door. Are there any questions about our camp life? There must be something you'd like to ask.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
You say Nisei teacher. What does Nisei mean?
Nisei is second generation.
Okay, what's
Our parents were first generation Issei, and Nisei means second generation. And like my daughter is Sansei, third generation, and our grandchildren are Yonsei, fourth generation. Yes.
I just want to ask one
Uh-huh.
There's some reason why, because like my mom's a Sanse and I'm a Yonsei.
Yes,
Most Sanses don't speak Japanese.
that's right.
And I mean, like, you know, like I make fun of my mom saying like,
Mhm.
we don't speak Japanese because now I don't, you know, and it's like, and you know, personally, hopefully when I get older, I want to learn, you know, how to speak it fluently. And
Yes.
I'm just wondering why. most Sanses
Well,
don't.
if you look like the enemy at the time, you really didn't want to speak it. There was a time when we were incarcerated that we were ashamed that we were Japanese. And when we came out of the camp, we even felt guilty. As strange as it may seem, though we didn't do anything, we still felt guilty. And so we sort of suppressed it. And fortunately, my mother spoke English and could understand it, so I never had to speak it in public. And my father understood English, and he could speak a little. So I was fortunate in that way, because you didn't want them to figure out what you were. And so, you know, and when my mother came back, my mother and father came back in December of 1944, when the war was still raging. After the Battle of Midway, I can't remember exactly the date of that battle, but after the Battle of Midway, the United States knew that they had won the war, and there was no necessity to drop the atom bomb, but they did anyway. And so my mother and father were urged to go out of camp, so they did. They were one of the first ones to return to California. And when they came, the grocery stores that we had traded with for years before the war would not sell us any food. So my mother and father had to go down to Chinatown on the streetcar and on the bus and buy their groceries and come back, because nobody would sell them any food. And so my father, insurance company that he worked for, he asked them to let him do their bookkeeping and whatever they wanted him to do in the way of the insurance business. They would not reinstate his license, or would they hire him to do anything. So, and then he tried to find other jobs, and finally he got so depressed without having a job, he committed suicide. So he committed suicide, let's see, on August 2nd, and on August 15th the war ended. So that's the story of one family. Okay.
I don't have nothing to do.
If someone died in camp, what did they do with the remains? And
Well,
they buried them there.
yes, they did. They had a mortuary come in and take the body out to prepare, and then they would bring them in, and they had a regular, whatever, Buddhist or Christian burial right in camp.
And they were buried in the same heart mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And say if you went out of camp, did
Uh-huh.
you take the remains with you?
No, most of them, well, some of them did, but some of them had them cremated, and then they took them back. But most of them are, there's a graveyard in Manzanar. You can go there today, and there's a graveyard there. There's a graveyard in Wyoming also. And there's one grave of a baby in Wyoming in some farmer's backyard. I don't know how that happened, but it's there. We went to visit it. Any other questions?
What was the length of stay at the camp?
Well, it varied. The longest was a little over 3 years. Mhm. Most of them left after the war, yes.
When you did leave, did the government give you money to each person?
Yes, $25.
Each person?
Yes.
Ration book.
Oh, and a ration book, yes. Because the war was still on in some cases, and rationing was still on.
The $25, how would you get out of our towns in Chicago? How did they get it?
Oh, they got transportation.
And they got transportation where they wanted to go?
Yes. Oh, the food was just horrible at the beginning. At Santa Anita, at the beginning, we got baked beans 3 times a day. We got it for breakfast, we got it for lunch, we got it for dinner. And finally, on the 3rd day, we decided to call a strike. And we did. What we did was we marched in, got our beans, turned them upside down on the table, and marched out. And when the table got all covered, we put it on top of that, and on top of that. And it was about this high by the time we got on through doing what we did. Oh, and then the military martial law was proclaimed, and the military came in, and tankers with machine guns on top, and we had to stay in our barracks. They wouldn't let us out of our barracks for a long time. Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, I know because,
Uh-huh.
these guys, my grandpa, now because of what happened in the, he doesn't like to eat apple butter.
Uh-huh. Yes, we had apple butter, and we had, Jim could tell you, they grew rutabagas, and we had rutabagas coming out of our ears. Okay, all right. What?
What about medical care?
What about medical care? We had a wonderful hospital. Not wonderful. It was it was the bare minimum, but we did have a hospital, and we did have professional nurses. Fortunately, some of the internees were graduate nurses, and but we had one Caucasian head nurse, and she wrote a story. I didn't bring the book, but what was her name? Kessel. Yeah, it's a marvelous book. It's a diary of what went on in Heart Mountain, how many babies were born, how many people died of what, and so on. You know, it was
Let Comia talk about her visit to
Yeah.
the hospital for her child.
Okay, sure. Yeah. And
Okay. I had a care